Rain glazed the steps of the King County Courthouse, turning the pale stone blue-gray beneath the afternoon sky. Nia Brooks stood alone at the bottom of them in a tailored charcoal raincoat, her natural hair gathered neatly at her neck, one hand wrapped around the handle of a scuffed cedar document case. Across the curbside lane, Grant Mercer arrived as if this were another investor dinner. His navy suit was cut to sharply for a divorce hearing. His expensive haircut had not shifted in the wind, and linked through his arm with Sloane Hart, glossy-haired and camera-ready in an emerald dress beneath her coat, her platinum bracelet catching the wet light. They looked like the future Grant wanted people to believe he had earned. Sloane noticed Nia first. Her eyes dropped to the cedar case, then lifted with a small, practiced smile. Grant did not bother hiding his satisfaction. "Still carrying boxes for yourself?" he asked, loud enough for the lawyers and waiting couples near the courthouse doors to hear. "You came alone, Nia. You should have taken the offer." It was not concern. It was theater. For years, Grant had learned how to make a room agree with him before anyone had heard the full story. A tailored suit, a polished building behind his name, the right woman at his side, and Nia, standing in practical burgundy ankle boots, was supposed to complete the picture he had designed for her. The wife he had outgrown, the woman he had supported, the woman with nothing left to say. Sloane leaned closer to him, designer sunglasses tucked in one hand. "Some people don't know when to let go," she said. The words landed softly. That was what made them cruel. Nia felt her fingers tighten around the cedar handle. Inside were papers Grant had not seen in years. Papers he had stopped remembering because he had spent so long rewriting the beginning. She could have opened the case right there. She could have told the strangers on the steps exactly whose money secured the first building, exactly who had repaired the numbers when Grant's proposals fell apart, exactly who had kept every deed, every wire confirmation, every promise he had put into writing. But Nia had learned that truth did not need to shout to survive. It only needed to be kept. So she looked at the man who had tried to make her smaller and answered in her gentle, steady voice, "I didn't come alone, Grant." His smile flickered. Nia lifted the cedar case slightly. "I came prepared." For 1 second, Grant's gray-green eyes went to the cedar case, not with recognition, with fear so brief that Sloane missed it entirely. Then Bailiff Renata Cole opened the courthouse doors and called the matter of Brooks and Mercer. The waiting hallway stirred. Leather soles clicked against stone. Grant recovered first, placing a hand at Sloane's back as if he still controlled the scene. But Nia was already moving. The cedar case was worn at the corners from being carried through a life Grant now described as his alone. It had once rested on the chipped oak table in their Capitol Hill walk-up, beside cold coffee, loose budgets, and the first plans for a neglected Pioneer Square warehouse with boarded windows and water-stained loading bays. Back then, neither of them had known what it would become. A waterfront development firm, glass offices, valet service, harbor views, a fortune with Grant's name printed across it. Inside the case was the first deed, the original confirmation of the Brooks Legacy Trust wire, correspondence from the acquisition, and the harbor founders' operating agreement, signed when Mercer Harbor Development was still only an idea, too fragile to stand on its own. Grant had treated those records like relics. Nia had treated them like history. That was the difference between them. He believed the past could be replaced by a better suit, a newer woman, and enough people willing to repeat his version of events. Nia understood that ink had a longer memory than pride. As she crossed the threshold into the hearing room, her mother's pearl studs felt cool against her skin. The case pressed lightly against her leg. Its contents were quiet, ordinary looking, a deed, a transfer record, an agreement. But ordinary things become dangerous when they carry the truth. Grant thought she had come to plead for a share of the life he had taken from her. He did not yet understand that she had come carrying the beginning of everything he claimed to own. 7 years earlier, before the waterfront tower and the private club dinners, Nia met Grant Mercer at a tiny window table in Harbor Light Coffee. It was a rainy Thursday. His laptop battery died halfway through his pitch. The pages of his proposal were out of order. His numbers did not match. And he kept speaking with that restless certainty of a man who could see a future before he knew how to build it. He wanted to buy overlooked buildings, old warehouses, tired blocks everyone else had dismissed. He wanted to make something lasting. Nia listened, not because his presentation was good. It wasn't. But because beneath the disorder, she saw a real idea, and she had always been able to see what things could become once someone took the time to put them in order. By day, She worked in affordable housing program administration at night. She repaired small business ledgers for people who had dreams larger than their spreadsheets. She knew how quickly ambition could drown without structure beneath it. Grant had the vision, Nia gave it bones. Their Capitol Hill walk-up was small enough that the rattling radiator could drown out a conversation. They bought a chipped oak kitchen table from a departing tenant for $35 and turned it into a planning desk. Grant paced while he talked about neighborhoods and potential. Nia sat with a pencil behind one ear, rewriting budgets, correcting timelines, making his hopeful language sound credible enough for lenders to take seriously. When he got discouraged, she made him dinner and stayed up later than she should have, rebuilding the proposal one page at a time. And when the credit line rejection arrived, Grant stared at the email as if it had personally insulted him. "They don't see it," he said. Nia looked at the failed application, then at the figures they had built together across that battered table. "No," she said quietly, "they don't see it yet." Grant looked at her then with the kind of gratitude that makes a person feel chosen. She mistook it for partnership. The next morning, while Grant searched for another lender, Nia called Martin Ibarra, the discreet family attorney who had known her mother for years. She did not call because she wanted to rescue Grant. Not entirely. She called because she believed in the life they had been planning together. And because even then, before the money and the marble and the lies, Nia was the one who knew what to do when a door closed. Martin explained what conventional lenders had already made clear. Grant had vision. He had confidence. He had a pitch. But none of it was enough to secure the Pioneer Square warehouse before another buyer stepped in. The building sat empty near the historic district, its brick dark with rain, its loading bay stained by years of neglect. Grant saw potential in every broken window. Nia saw the deadline closing around them at the chipped oak table, the same table where they had built budgets out of borrowed time. She spread out the trust documents. The Brooks Legacy Trust had been created to protect her future, not to decorate someone else's success. But Grant was sitting across from her with tired eyes and both hands folded tight. And Nia still believed love meant betting on the person beside you. So she used the capital connected to the trust. The wire went out. The first acquisition closed. The warehouse became theirs, or so she thought. That night, rain tapped against the walk-up windows while Grant stood behind her at the oak table. He took her hands in his, almost reverently, as though he understood the weight of what she had just done. "I'll make this right," he told her. "I'll pay it back, and everyone will know what you did for us." For us. The words were warm. They were intimate. They were exactly what Nia needed to hear. She did not ask him to repeat them in front of an attorney. She did not ask what would happen if success changed him. She did not imagine that one day he would stand in a courthouse and call her uninvolved. She simply looked at the man she loved and believed him. That was the sacrifice people never understood about Nia. It was not only the trust-backed capital, it was the faith she placed beside it. The Pioneer Square warehouse became the foothold, then the collateral, then the foundation beneath the next acquisitions and the next promises. Grant's dream finally had an address, and with every brick the company added, Nia's contribution sank deeper into the structure, so deep, Grant would later convince himself no one could see it anymore. Success arrived slowly at first, then all at once. The old rented room over a neighborhood copy shop became upper floors at Harbor Point Tower. The views changed from brick alleys and wet pavement to Elliott Bay, and ferries moving through silver water. Lobby attendants learned Grant's name. Valets reached for his keys. Investors waited when he was late, and Grant began to dress like the man he wanted the city to see. Navy suits, private dinners, perfect presentations with Mercer Harbor Development printed in clean gold letters across the screen. At first, Nia was still beside him. She reviewed financing, negotiated vendor terms, organized operations when new projects threatened to outrun the company's systems. The Brooks Legacy Trust had supported the first 3 acquisitions, but Grant did not mention that at fundraisers. He did not mention the long nights Nia spent repairing deals after everyone else had gone home. He simply smiled beneath hotel lights and said, "I built this from nothing." The first time, Nia told herself he was nervous. The second time, she told herself it was shorthand. By the 5th time, she understood it was a decision. He changed how he introduced her, from partner to my wife, then only Nia, as if her name did not need a role attached to it because she no longer had one. At the firm's events, he placed her near donors and asked her to smile. When she tried to speak about the early projects, he would gently take over. finishing the story in a way that removed her from it. Erasure rarely begins with one dramatic lie. Sometimes it begins with a man editing a sentence while he is still holding your hand. Before one fundraising event, Grant stood in their dressing room and looked at her outfit with open irritation. "Can you wear something else?" he asked. "Something less practical?" Nia looked down at herself, then back at him. His expression softened just enough to make the insult deniable. "We're around investors tonight," he said. "Appearances matter." Appearances, as if she had not helped create every polished surface now surrounding him. As if the woman who built the foundation was suddenly unfit to stand in the lobby. Nia said nothing, not then, but something inside her began to keep score. The Magnolia Bluff house had the kind of silence money was supposed to buy. White marble, wide windows facing the sound, rooms so carefully arranged they no longer looked lived in. Nia stood at the kitchen island in her charcoal raincoat, still wearing her mother's pearl studs, while Grant poured himself a drink without looking at her. She had spent the afternoon waiting for him to acknowledge the meeting he had excluded her from. One meeting, then another, then the entire shape of the life they had built together. "You didn't even tell me," she said quietly. Grant's jaw tightened. Not with guilt, with annoyance. "Nia, you make everything into a referendum on the past." "The past paid for this house," she said. "The past built the company. I was there for all of it." For a moment, he looked at her as if she had tracked rain across one of his polished floors. Then he set down his glass. "You helped when things were messy," he said. "That doesn't mean you fit the life I built after they weren't." The words landed with almost no sound. Their quietness made them cruel. Not a fight, not a confession, just a man standing in a house she had helped make possible, calmly informing her that she had become an embarrassment to it. Grant called their history baggage. He called her questions exhausting. He spoke as though her years of labor had been a favor he was tired of remembering. And Nia understood something cold and final. He was not waiting to recognize her. He had already decided to remove her. But Grant had forgotten the woman he was dismissing had once kept every urgent file. Because he was too busy chasing the next deal. She had filed the deed, saved the wire confirmation, printed the emails, kept the signed agreement from the first acquisition in sleeves marked by date and purpose. At the time, she had done it to protect him. One day, those same records would protect her. Grant turned back toward the windows, certain he had won because Nia did not raise her voice. He did not understand that silence was not surrender. Sometimes it was the moment a woman stopped asking to be seen and began making sure the truth could not be buried. A week later, Grant brought Sloane Hart's name into the house as casually as if he were discussing a new caterer. "She's directing donor events and sponsor relations for the foundation," he said, scrolling through his phone. "She understands the room." Nia looked at him. "The room?" Grant gave a faint, impatient smile. "Sloane understands presentation. She knows how to make people feel confident in what they're buying into." What he meant was simpler. Sloane was 31, polished enough for a camera, with glossy dark blonde hair, designer sunglasses, and the ease of someone who had never been asked to justify taking up space. And Grant had decided she belonged beside him. Nia had spent years making Mercer Harbor development work when it was only to exhausted people and a damaged warehouse. Sloane arrived when the views were better, the donors were richer, and Grant wanted someone who looked like his success had always been effortless. The announcement came at the Rainier Grand Hotel. Candlelight trembled across glass tables. Harbor views shone black beyond the windows. Grant moved through the waterfront restoration benefit in a sharply cut navy suit, smiling for investors beneath the company's gold lettering. Nia arrived alone. Grant barely noticed. Then Sloane appeared in an emerald dress, platinum bracelet catching the light as she slipped her hand around his arm. He leaned toward her. She laughed. Cameras turned. Nia stood near the edge of the ballroom while the man who once said "for us" performed a new version of his life, without her in it. Later, someone's phone lit up beside her with a post from the event. Grant and Sloane, framed against the harbor, Mercer Harbor Development's power pair. Nia stared at the words until they blurred. It was not a rumor, not a mistake, not something Grant could explain away in private the next morning. It was an announcement. He had not merely found someone else. He had chosen an audience for her replacement. Across the ballroom, Sloane lifted her chin toward the cameras while Grant's hand settled at the small of her back, and Nia finally saw the full design of his cruelty. He wanted the city to believe she had never belonged beside him at all. Grant came home after midnight smelling of expensive cologne and hotel candles. Nia was waiting in the Magnolia kitchen. The lights were low. The sound beyond the windows was black and still. For one last moment, she let herself hope he would look ashamed. He did not. "You left me standing there," she said. Grant loosened his tie. "You chose to stay. You introduced her as if she belongs to everything we built. She belongs in the life I have now." Nia went very still. "And I don't." His tired eyes hardened. "This is exactly what I mean," he said. "You keep dragging up old ledgers and late nights like they are supposed to prove something. It's exhausting, Nia. They do prove something." Her voice did not rise. "I helped build Mercer Harbor. I secured the first deal. I kept it running when you were chasing the next one." Grant gave a short laugh with no warmth in it. "You helped. You were my wife. Stop turning that into some claim on the rest of my life." There it was, every sacrifice reduced to help. Every year reduced to a marriage he could dismiss once it no longer improved his image. Nia looked at him, and something inside her broke cleanly instead of loudly. Not her heart, her expectation. Grant went upstairs believing the argument was over, believing he had made her small enough to accept whatever space he left for her. He had forgotten about the old company account. In the quiet of the house, Nia opened her laptop at the Marble Island. The account was buried beneath newer systems and polished dashboards Grant preferred now. But she knew where the older folders lived: deeds, transfers, trust funding, acquisitions, founders, signatures. She searched each word slowly, carefully. Files began appearing across the screen: old emails, payment notes, financing correspondence, the trail of a company before it had lobby attendants and bay views, before Grant had learned to tell his story without her. Nia did not cry. She saved copies, because fury could be denied. Heartbreak could be called bitterness, but records had dates, and dates did not care who looked better in a photograph. By the time the dissolution petition arrived, Nia was living in the Beacon Hill rental with moving boxes stacked beside a thrifted sofa and a baseboard heater that hummed through the night. Grant had kept the Magnolia Bluff house. Of course he had tried to. The petition was thick, formal, and mercilessly clean. Nia sat at her small table and read each page beneath the hard yellow light. Grant sought exclusive control of Mercer Harbor Development, the company's shares, the investment accounts, the Bluff House, future profits, and among the assets listed with careful, bloodless language was a residence in the San Juan Islands, acquired through an entity Nia had never been told existed. In exchange, he offered 5 months of temporary support. 5 months for the capital, the work, the contracts, the years. His attorney, Douglas Vane, described Nia's role as having no meaningful operational contribution. A spouse who had been cared for, not a founder, not a partner, not someone entitled to the future of the enterprise she helped put into motion. Grant had taken the lie from the ballroom and placed it in a legal filing. Now he wanted a court to make it permanent. Her phone vibrated. A message from Sloane. "You should let this go quietly. Grant has moved on. You should too." Nia read it once, then again, quietly. That was what they wanted from her. Not peace, disappearance. She set the phone down and reached for an old photograph she had carried from the Bluff House. Grant and Nia stood outside the Pioneer Square warehouse in the rain, younger and worn down, smiling in front of boarded windows and a building no one else wanted. The beginning was right there in her hands. Not glamorous, not polished, not rewritten. She looked from the photograph to the petition. Grant wanted the city, the company, and the court to believe he had built everything alone. But his demand had made one thing clear. He was no longer trying to leave her. He was trying to erase the evidence that she had ever mattered. Douglas Vane's words stayed with her, no meaningful contribution. Nia read them again until the insult lost its power to shock her and became something else. A challenge. She remembered the Pioneer Square warehouse before the waterfront portfolio. Water stains along the loading bays, boarded windows, Grant pacing through the empty building, talking about what it could become while Nia stood beside him calculating what it would cost to keep that dream alive. She remembered the calls, the vendor negotiations, the late-night ledgers, the trust-backed wire that had made the first closing possible. When no conventional lender would take the risk, ornamental women did not do those things. Ornamental women were not asked to save a company before it had learned how to save itself. Nia stood from the table and walked to the bedroom closet. Above the folded linens and winter coats on the highest shelf sat the blue archive bin. For years, She had kept it because some part of her had known that memories could be edited. Paper could not. She pulled it down and carried it to the floor. Inside were bank folders, notebooks, legal pads, encrypted drives. An old company record she had never been able to throw away. Not because she was holding on to Grant, because she had been holding on to the truth. Nia opened the lid, and for the first time since the petition arrived, she did not feel like a woman being pushed out of her own life. She felt like its first witness. Now she only had to make the record speak. At the bottom of the blue archive bin, beneath the notebooks and old legal pads, Nia found a small encrypted drive with a label in her own handwriting. Pioneer, Originals. Do not discard. For a moment, she only held it. The plastic was ordinary, scuffed at the edges, light enough to disappear in the palm of her hand. But 7 years earlier, it had held the life Grant was now trying to claim as his alone. Nia slid the drive into her laptop beside the dissolution petition. Folders opened across the screen. Vendor schedules, financing notes, emails with Mar Feld about revised terms and payment deadlines. Spreadsheets tracking every dollar that had gone into the Pioneer Square warehouse. Before Mercer Harbor Development had a waterfront office, a valet stand, or a polished presentation for investors. She had organized it all herself, not because she expected betrayal, because she understood that chaos was expensive. The next morning, cold rain followed her into Deschmuke Legal's Pioneer Square office. Nia wore her charcoal raincoat and burgundy ankle boots, carrying the petition in one hand and the drive in the other. Priya Deschmuke listened without interrupting. Then she put on her rectangular reading glasses and began opening files. She did not rush. She did not offer false comfort. She read the petition, then the records, then the petition again. Minutes passed. Finally, Priya looked up. He says you had no meaningful operational role. She said quietly. Nia nodded. Priya turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was an email chain Nia had sent during the first acquisition, correcting a financing term before it could cost them the deal. He is going to have a difficult time maintaining that story. Something inside Nia loosened. Not the grief, not yet, but the terrible loneliness of wondering whether the truth would matter once it entered a courtroom. Priya opened another folder. The original records were dated, ordered, and connected. They did not sound like memory. They did not sound like a wounded former spouse trying to rewrite a marriage. They sounded like business. They showed who moved money, who negotiated, who kept the company standing when it was still small enough to fail from one missed payment. Priya placed her hand over the dissolution petition. This is not just a response to his filing. She said, this is the foundation of a counterclaim. Grant had arrived first with a polished lie, but Nia had brought the beginning. And beginnings, when they are documented, have a way of surviving the people who try to erase them. By the time Nia returned to King County Superior Courthouse, the rain had darkened the stone steps and turned the tall windows blue-gray. She carried the cedar document case close to her side. Across the hearing room, Grant Mercer looked exactly like the man Seattle had learned to trust with expensive buildings and expensive promises. His navy suit was sharply cut. His close-cropped hair was perfect. His gray-green eyes stayed fixed ahead as though the room had been built for him. Sloane sat behind him in her fitted emerald dress, one platinum bracelet catching the flat afternoon light whenever she moved. She looked calm, certain, like a woman who believed she was seated beside success. Douglas Vane rose first, immaculate down to his silver tie bar and polished Oxford shoes. He spoke in the smooth, measured language of a man trying to turn a life into a simple equation. Grant had founded Mercer Harbor Development. Grant had identified the properties. Grant had carried the risk. Grant had built the waterfront portfolio through vision, discipline, and personal sacrifice, and Nia, Douglas said, had benefited from that success as Grant's spouse. A spouse who had been cared for, a spouse who had enjoyed the life he created. Not a business partner, not an operational force, not a founder. Each phrase was delivered with the gentle polish of legal language. The polish only sharpened the cruelty. Cruelty did not always arrive shouting. Sometimes it wore a tailored suit and asked the court to call theft a marriage. Nia sat beside Priya with the cedar document case resting near her knee. She could feel the old grain beneath her fingertips. Inside were the first deed, the wire confirmation, the correspondence, the agreement, the things Grant had counted on becoming irrelevant. He did not look at her. He looked toward the judge with the controlled expression of a man already rehearsing his victory. Behind him, Sloane crossed one leg over the other and watched Nia with a faint, dismissive stillness. as if quiet meant weak, as if a woman who did not fight for attention had nothing worth hearing. Nia's throat tightened once, then she felt Priya's hand touch the edge of the table beside hers. A small signal. Do not interrupt. Let them say all of it. So Nia stayed still while Douglas built Grant's version of history brick by polished brick. Because a lie told halfway could still hide. A lie told completely gave the truth somewhere to begin. When Douglas finished, Priya stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Counsel has described Mercer Harbor Development as Mr. Mercer's sole achievement. She said, "Let us begin with the first asset." The screen beside the judge's bench changed. A dated wire confirmation appeared. The Brooks Trust wire confirmation, 7 years old. The amount had been transferred from the Brooks Legacy Trust into Pioneer Warehouse Holdings LLC. The entity formed to acquire the boarded-up warehouse in Pioneer Square. Not from Grant's personal account, not from a lender willing to back his vision. From the family trust naming Nia as its primary beneficiary. The room became very still. Nia saw Grant's jaw tighten before he could stop it. Priya moved to the next record. Emails between Nia and Mara Feld, the acquisition attorney. Nia asking about revised financing terms. Nia flagging vendor payments. Nia confirming deadlines. Nia reviewing the numbers that kept the warehouse deal from collapsing before closing. Then came the ledgers, then the payment schedules, then the notes in Nia's careful hand, documenting repairs, obligations, and cash flow when the warehouse was still empty. Water-stained and unwanted. Douglas rose quickly. Those are marital administrative tasks. He said, they do not establish ownership. Priya turned toward him with patient calm. Then perhaps Mr. Mercer's own words will clarify the nature of her role. She lifted a printed email. Grant had written it years before the waterfront office, before the gala photographs, before he had learned to speak about Mercer Harbor Development as though it had emerged fully formed from his ambition. In that email, he acknowledged that Nia had made the company possible. Not supported it from the sidelines, made it possible. Grant shifted in his chair. His tired eyes flicked toward the screen, then away. The sentence hung over the hearing room with nowhere to go. Sloane's confidence changed first. It was slight, a pause in her expression, her shoulders drawing back as she looked from Grant to the wire confirmation, as though she had suddenly discovered that the story she had been given had missing pages. The Pioneer Square warehouse had not been a romantic anecdote from Grant's rise. It had been the foundation, and Nia had not stood beside that foundation smiling for a photograph. She had funded it. She had organized it. She had helped make it whole. Grant's empire had always depended on labor he now wanted to call invisible. Our records do not become less true because the person who needs them is no longer welcome at the table. Priya let the wire confirmation remain on the screen for one more moment. Then she reached into the cedar document case. The founding capital did not move without protection. She said. She placed the Harbor Founders Operating Agreement before the court. Nia recognized it immediately. She saw, for one sharp second, the chipped oak table in their Capitol Hill walk-up, Grant leaning over budgets, coffee gone cold between them, his voice full of urgency and belief. We are building this together. At the time, the agreement had felt like one more careful step toward a future that both trusted. Now it was the document he had forgotten to fear. Priya established that the Pioneer Square warehouse, acquired through Pioneer Warehouse Holdings LLC, became collateral for the expansion that followed, the later portfolio, the waterfront developments. The wealth Grant now claimed had nothing to do with Nia. The first brick supported the whole structure that Priya read Section 14. If concealment, misrepresentation, or improper transfer involved trust-backed assets, controlling interest could revert to the primary beneficiary pending judicial review. Nia, the primary beneficiary of the Brooks Legacy Trust. Grant gave a short, disbelieving laugh. That agreement concerned one warehouse, he said. Judge Elena Marquez looked at him over her rimless glasses. Mr. Mercer, you will allow counsel to finish. His face hardened. Priya continued. The agreement had been signed. The trust representative, Harold Brooks, had acknowledged it, and the warehouse was not an isolated relic from a modest beginning. It was the trust-backed base from which Mercer Harbor Development had grown. Douglas tried to narrow the language, to make the clause sound technical, limited, harmless, but the words were already in the record. Concealment, misrepresentation, improper transfer. 3 words Grant had spent years assuming would never be turned toward him. Priya requested a court-ordered forensic review of the company's entities. ownership schedules, communications, authorizations, and transfer trails. She asked that the trust-backed holdings be placed under Harold's temporary administration. While the court determined what Grant had moved and why, Sloane's face lost color. She looked at Grant differently now, not like a powerful man defending what was his, like a man whose polished life might have been built on a door he had signed himself into locking. Grant started to rise. Judge Marquez's voice stopped him. "Sit down, Mr. Mercer." He stood frozen for half a breath. Then he sat, and for the first time that day, Nia saw what fear looked like beneath his confidence. It looked like a man realizing the woman he had dismissed had not come to court, asking to be remembered. She had come with the authority to make him answer. The spring light faded as the hearing moved deeper into Grant's finances. Outside, rain streaked the courthouse windows. Inside, Priya began laying out the trail. New Mercer affiliate entities formed in close succession, revised ownership schedules, transfers routed through names that had not appeared in the company's earlier structure, communications sent late, after the separation had already turned hostile, and temporary financial preservation notices had been issued. Douglas objected where he could. Priya answered with dates. Dates were difficult to charm. Then the screen changed again. A transfer record for the San Juan retreat, the island residence Grant had acquired through a separate entity, after he had received written notice requiring disputed assets to be preserved. The timing appeared in clean black numbers. Notice first, transfer after. Judge Marquez studied the document without speaking. Sloane leaned forward despite herself. For a moment, Nia saw recognition move across her face. Not just concern, calculation, the quiet horror of understanding that the sea glass paint swatches, the fairy morning language, the island escape Grant had made seem effortless might be tied to something far more dangerous than a private indulgence. Her hand slipped away from the armrest near Grant's chair. Priya's voice remained even. This transfer occurred after Mr. Mercer received preservation requirements. It was made through an affiliate entity now connected to the broader ownership review. Douglas began to speak. Judge Marquez raised one hand. "No, counsel. I want to hear from Mr. Mercer." Grant looked at the record. His jaw clenched. The man who had spent the afternoon presenting himself as the sole architect of everything could not look away from a single date. "Mr. Mercer," the judge said, "why was this property transferred after you received notice to preserve disputed assets?" Grant opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Sloane stared at him now, not with admiration, but with distance, and in the blue-gray light of the courthouse, with every polished excuse narrowing around him, Grant Mercer finally looked less like a man in control. He looked like a man running out of places to hide. Grant finally found his voice. "I didn't handle that transfer personally." It was the kind of answer designed to create fog. Priya did not argue with him. She simply brought up the authorization. His authorization. There was beneath the transfer instruction for the San Juan retreat. Grant Mercer's name. His electronic approval, dated after the preservation requirements had been delivered. The courtroom went still. Grant looked at the screen as if distance could change what it said. It could not. A signature is not a misunderstanding. An authorization is not an accident. Judge Marquez called a recess. Nia sat with her hands folded over the cedar document case, listening to rain tick against the tall windows across the room. Grant spoke sharply to Douglas. Sloane stood a little apart now, her designer sunglasses clenched in one hand. Nia did not watch them for long. She had spent too many years waiting to see whether Grant would choose honesty when it cost him something. Now the court would decide what he could touch while the truth was being found. When Judge Marquez returned, her voice was direct. The court ordered a forensic review of Mercer Harbor Development, its affiliate entities, ownership schedules, authorizations, communications, and transfer trails, the Bluff House, the San Juan Retreat, company shares, investment accounts, and real estate proceeds were frozen pending review. Connected transfers were suspended. Grant's access to disputed proceeds and distributions was restricted, and the trust-backed holdings would be placed under Harold Brooks' temporary administration. Grant's expression did not break all at once. It tightened. His jaw, his tired eyes, the careful face he had built for investors and private club dinners. But Nia understood what had just happened. The man who had claimed everything was his alone no longer had the right to move through it alone. Not while the court looked beneath the polished surface, not while the records were speaking. The hallway outside the hearing room smelled of wet wool, old stone, and rain carried in on expensive coats. Grant followed Sloane toward the elevators. "Nobody has taken anything from me," he said, too quickly. "This is temporary." Sloane turned. For the first time, there was no warmth in her face, no polished confidence, no performance of standing beside a powerful man. "What do you actually own?" she asked. Grant stared at her. She looked past him, toward the courtroom doors, toward the order that had frozen the life he had displayed so effortlessly. Then she shook her head. "I thought she was just trying to take what you built." Nia stood a few feet away with Priya, the cedar document case at her side. Sloane's eyes met hers only briefly, long enough to understand that Nia had not appeared from nowhere to threaten Grant's success. She had been there before the success had a name. Sloane left alone. Grant's phone began vibrating almost immediately, then again. Harbor portfolio investors wanted explanations. Cascadia Credit Consortium wanted clarification. The calls came one after another, each one stripping another layer from the image he had spent years protecting. He looked at Nia as she passed him, not with contempt now, with a raw, disbelieving anger of a man discovering that the story he told about someone else had stopped working. Nia paused. Her voice was gentle. That made it land harder. "You spent years deciding who I was, Grant." She glanced toward the courtroom doors. "Now the record speaks for itself." Then she walked on beside Priya, carrying the records that had brought the truth into the open. Outside, the courthouse steps shone black beneath the spring rain. Priya stood beside Nia beneath the stone overhang. "You do not owe him a conversation," she said quietly. Nia knew that. But when Grant came through the courthouse doors, his navy suit damp at the shoulders and his phone still lighting up with calls, he would not answer. She turned to face him. He stopped a few feet away. For once, there was no audience he could impress, no investor table, no Harborview office, no Sloane at his side. "I was afraid," he said. Nia said nothing, afraid of losing control, afraid of what would happen if everything changed. His gray-green eyes searched her face. "We can fix this. We built this together." There it was, the old language, not offered when she was being erased, not offered when he filed papers calling her irrelevant, only now, when the court had placed limits around what he could control. Nia held the cedar document case close against her raincoat. "You did not lose everything because you were afraid," she said. "You lost it because you kept taking what was not yours to take." Grant flinched. She continued, calm and unmistakable. "The truth is in the record now. The forensic review will do what it needs to do, and what happens next depends on the choices you make when no one is protecting you from the consequences." His face crumpled around the edges. "But us?" he asked. "Nia, please." She looked at the man she had once trusted across a chipped oak table, before wealth had taught him to confuse possession with worth. "There is no us to repair." The rain fell harder beyond the courthouse steps, and Grant had nothing left to offer her that she needed. Grant stood beneath the courthouse overhang, watching her as though he had only just understood that she could leave. "Nia," he said. She turned once more. His voice had gone small. "Did you ever love me for a moment?" The question carried her backward to the Capitol Hill walk-up, the rattling radiators, the cramped kitchen, the chipped oak table they had bought from a departing tenant for $35. Grant's plans spread across its scratched surface, her budgets beside them. Their tired hands, their borrowed hope. Her love had been real. That was the sorrow of it. Nia looked at him through the gray-blue rain, her mother's pearl studs catching the weak afternoon light. "Yes," she said, "I love you." Grant closed his eyes. "But that is not what I regret." He looked at her again. Nia's grip settled around the cedar document case. "I regret letting your blindness make me question my own value. I regret believing that loving you meant becoming smaller so you could feel larger." The words did not rise into anger. They did not need to. They were simply true. "You can live with what you chose," she said, "but I will not live that way anymore." Then she walked down the rain-darkened steps beside Priya. Inside the car, Nia set the document case on her lap. The courthouse receded beyond the window, pale stone dissolving into wet streets and evening traffic. Grant remained behind it, alone with the empire he had tried to claim alone. And for the first time in years, Nia did not need him to remember what she had built. She remembered